It's just obviously a cost thing. I mean, lithium iron phosphate batteries are between a third to 50% as expensive, the cathode active material that is, than an NMC cathode active material. They have longer life. They're also superior on the fire safety rating.
My next guest is John Passalacqua. He's the CEO of First Phosphate Corp. It's going to be trading on the CSE under the symbol PHOS. John, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, James. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks for asking. John, let's start with an overview. What's the business of First Phosphate?
So First Phosphate is in the business of mining phosphate for the LFP battery industry.
Interesting. I've never heard of a phosphate company mining phosphate for batteries. How does the process in producing a phosphate for batteries differ from producing phosphate as the agricultural additive?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, James. So right now, and as it is traditionally, phosphate represents about 90 to 95% is represented 90 to 95% by the agricultural market for fertilizer. But there is about 5 to 10% of phosphate when it gets purified up to purified phosphoric acid that serves for industrial uses. Part of that is still food, so you'll find it in a can of Coca-Cola, purified phosphoric acid. But you'll also find phosphate in very strange things like paints, fire extinguishers, small electronics. You find it in pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and a whole host of other industrial products. But now the really big usage that is starting because of the lithium iron phosphate battery is the LFP battery itself. And that's going to be a category that's really going to balloon out this need for purified phosphoric acid. It's still not going to affect the fertilizer market, which is 90 to 95% of phosphate. But within that category of purified phosphoric acid, it's going to be a big one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so then in the actual processing of phosphorus into a battery additive or ingredient, where does the process diverge from processing for fertilizers or phosphoric acid? And is it more expensive? Is it more complicated? Is it a pure substance?
Yeah, so this is where people get very confused, and I'm going to just try to explain it very, very basically. So first, and I'll start from the beginning. First, when you pull out phosphate material from the mine, you pull it out in what it is a phosphate ore, either in sedimentary rock or igneous rock. First phosphate happens to be in igneous rock, which is the purest in the world. And then from there, you have to concentrate it. You get to a pure form of apatite. That's the host mineral for most phosphates out there. And then from there, you have to do a first transformation, a first purification, which it goes into what's called merchant grade acid. And then once you have merchant grade phosphoric acid, which is semi-pure, that is used for fertilizers, for a number of different fertilizer applications. But then from there, you purify to a second level, which is purified phosphoric acid. And then within purified phosphoric acid, you have different levels of purity. But at the level of phosphoric acid, that's when you're going into anything that's consumable by humans. Anything underneath that is fertilizer for farm fields or animal feed. But once you get to purified phosphoric acid, you're into really sensitive uses like human consumption and electronics, pharmaceuticals, those kind of very, very, very pure uses. And that's where you get to the LFP battery. So for LFP battery, you're starting with food grade phosphoric acid, highly pure, and then you're purifying it even more. You're pulling out whatever you can, all the metals, because of the conductivity, obviously, and other elements like such as sulfur. And you're really aiming for maximum purity, no different than what they're doing with lithium and graphite as well.
Mm-hmm. So what is the specification of the phosphoric acid in terms of purity and concentration as it's delivered to the battery producer?
So it's the phosphate is not necessarily delivered to the battery producer. That's another one to explain here. So when you're making a LFP a battery, say a car, an EV has an LFP battery in it, then basically that LFP battery is going to have inside of it, LFP cathode active material. So just the powder that goes in, just like you have the powder for the NMC batteries for the cathode. So this powder is, how do you make this powder? So this powder is made out of lithium, phosphate, and iron. So there's three precursors that go into making that powder, which is phosphoric acid, iron sulfate in general, and lithium hydroxide. So when the phosphate that goes into the battery, it goes into the cathode, and it goes into the cathode active material as purified phosphoric acid. Generally, that's 100% pure, but it's 85% concentration. It has 15% of water, and then within the phosphoric acid, there's another percentage of water. So it's usually 65% pure phosphate, P2O5, and the rest is some type of aqueous substance that sort of gets rinsed out when you make the LFP cathode active material. I know it's a very complex sort of explanation I've given you, but that's about as simple as I can make it.
Yeah, that's understandable. So to what extent does the cost of producing your phosphate impacted by the grade of phosphate in your deposit or at the head grade?
Yeah, that's an excellent question there, James. I think it's really important to notice the difference between sedimentary rock and igneous rock. So when you have sedimentary rock to make phosphate, that's very good for to make purified phosphate. That's very good for fertilizer uses because you're not scaling up to a high level of purity. And phosphate rock from sedimentary phosphate rock contains a lot of impurities. So it's very difficult to make a lot of phosphoric acid out of their purified phosphoric acid. You can make MgA, but to make purified phosphoric acid, it would take a lot of work. You wouldn't be able to get that much out of it, and it would be very costly. Whereas when you're starting out with igneous rock, because of its purity and its low radioactivity and its low level of trace elements, you can usually scale up about 88% of it to purified phosphoric acid. And that's really where we see the devil in the detail. It allows us to, as First Phosphate, to focus on the LFP battery industry in North America, to be a pure play LFP battery, phosphate for batteries producer, in that 90% or almost all of what we make will be able to be applied towards the LFP battery. Whereas when you're in sedimentary rock, 90% of what you make has to go into fertilizer, and only 10%, roughly speaking, can be scaled up to purified phosphoric acid. And that's the real difference between the two materials.
Okay. And so is the sort of compelling logic to use phosphate in a battery because it replaces nickel and cobalt?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always going to be a room for both chemistries. Nickel, manganese, cobalt is not going away. A lithium iron phosphate is not going away. You could say that the two compete with each other, or that they're complementary, right? Nickel, manganese, cobalt is very good for the really high end uses. Lithium iron phosphate is good sort of for the mid and standard range uses, which is sort of like the backbone of the auto industry, and that's why it's going to be massive and probably take over 50% of the uses. But yeah, a cathode active material made from lithium iron phosphate is equivalent in that it's still a battery, just like the nickel, manganese, and cobalt formulations are as well. It's just obviously a cost thing. I mean, lithium iron phosphate batteries are between a third to 50% as expensive, the cathode active material that is, than an NMC cathode active material. They have longer life. They're also superior on the fire safety rating, and they might have a little bit less power than the other batteries, but that really only affects range, right? So they're great for a city car, and they're great for uses where there's multiple charging stations, and you still get a very long charge out of them. But the effects on safety and on price are so great that they're becoming very, very popular.
Mm. Okay, so you're at the point now where you have a indicated pit constrained resource of 15.8 million tons at 5.18% phosphate. And when do you think, or when do you envision that production will begin and you'll actually be selling product to the cathode producers?
Yeah, so what's interesting about that? So first of all, our resource is 15 million tons in the ground of indicated, and there's another about 35 million of inferred. So we get close to 50 million tons of phosphate grading at 5.2%, as you indicated. So right now that's from a 43-101 report. That's our property at Lac-St-Jean. So the next stage is to then move that to a PEA, which is a preliminary economic assessment. We're going to begin that shortly. And then after that would happen, we would need to move to, a feasibility study, go through the environmental approvals. So, it could be somewhere between 3 and 5 years away before we could be extracting and producing phosphate concentrate from that mine.
Uh-huh. Okay, great. John, that's an excellent introduction to the company. We're going to leave it there for now. We'll come back to you in due course. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. Really appreciate the opportunity.